The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
Shots fired, shots fired. Shots fired, shots fired. If it's so crappy to buy computer speakers, then I'm waiting for someone to give me a whole home cinema system with speakers to just plug on my computer. But then I don't have the space for this here. My Logitech G51 are doing the trick just fine. Yes, I had to fiddle with the settings, but now they sound just fine to me. Of course, it's not like a sound system worth a couple grands, but it's good enough for me. Actually, this isn't a troll comment. It's actually legitimate criticism, and it's actually some of the best criticism that anybody could post in the comments, because it's a very solid point, and it's actually a point that I used to make. And actually, this isn't the first time that I've been, dogmatic with the whole computer speaker thing like this. These kinds of discussions, sometimes rather spirited in nature, go all the way back to college for me. I mean, there were some people with some really bizarre setups, like, there was one guy, he bought a set of lab techs that had a really weird subwoofer in metal, but I said, why on earth did you buy that instead of like Altec or Cambridge Soundworks or something like that? And he's like, well, it was cheap and I like the bass. So it was very weird because a subwoofer inside a metal container, well, it did have some rattling going on, but that's pretty much it. However, I do have to do a montage at some point showing my journey in and out of the world of computer speakers, because those of you who may think I'm some kind of elitist about skipping the whole computer speaker racket, and if you think I'm some kind of elitist, wait until you hear about some of the crazy setups I've had. Sneak peek, the weirdest one I ever had, put a cheap Kmart subwoofer inside a desk drawer for bass. But let's not forget, folks, I went to a technical high school because the regular high school sucked, and I was in the electronics shop. We had guys in there that were playing with speakers all day. There was one guy, he took a cardboard tube from a set of construction site, supplies, bolted a subwoofer to it, or maybe he just duct taped it or something, put something on the other end, and he called it a bass tube. He thought he had a really good piece of equipment when all he did was fire his subwoofer speaker into, or his truck woofer, I should say, into a cardboard tube. When we're first playing around with sound, we'll call anything good until, as we're playing around. It's all part of the growing process. Also, in the case of Raptor, who, by the way, this isn't the first time that Raptor has submitted some very good feedback like this. It's not a good idea to talk about this sort of stuff when one of your videos is testing the Logitech Z2300s, which is actually the 2.1 version of these Logitechs that I have. I actually, several years ago, recommended one of those for a cafeteria sound setup because the little piece of junk Altecs they were putting in with the computer in the cafeteria weren't loud enough. People couldn't hear, even when the volume was maxed. So I was like, just go Logitech. But that was with an office computer with only a mini plug for sound. So the whole mini plug thing is really what's buoying a lot of this. If there were more options available where you could encode on the fly, we probably wouldn't see as many computer speakers. Oh yeah, by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar, the G51s are one of these deals. This is basically the kind of crap that Logitech has at the low end for people that want like a 70-watt whatever. But it's a joke. I mean, this is 70 watts or something? I don't know. Anyways, I don't mess with this stuff. That looks like a really small subwoofer though, compared to, say, the footrests that I usually buy, and of course, 2 mid-ranges, because two speakers are better than one. Why not have like something flappy in the bottom and put something more like a tweeter in the top? Yeah. I've been around these gimmicks for too long. That's why I'm so critical of them, because I've woken up from my slumber, so to speak. That doesn't mean necessarily that I don't use computer speakers anymore, but for my main setups and my best setups, I will not even consider any kind of computer sets, because they tend to be too proprietary and too throwaway. Speaking of which, let's not forget, I switched over to my AV receiver-based setup because I wanted replaceable parts and no more warranty shenanigans with the Z, like I had with those Z5500 digitals. So basically, I did with my computer sound what a lot of people do when they build their own computers. Got rid of the proprietary off-the-shelf stuff and put something together that I can actually have an upgrade path for and not be locked into proprietary garbage. So, especially with these off-the-shelves like this sucker. Oh, everything's Smurf-vision now because I was... that's kind of tan-ish. Well, while the camera's... Oh, cool. Camera reset. Nice. I'm catching a break on some things today. So, yeah. These whole setups and whatnot, I mean, something like this would work in a pinch, but I wouldn't use it for anything serious. And even even when you're talking space or something like that, I mean, my subwoofer, the little passive one, is an 8-inch. So it's an 8-inch. It's not like it's a 12-inch thing. And in terms of things not costing thousands of dollars, nothing that I have as far as sound goes costs that much. Even the Klipsch Pro Medias, when I bought them new years and years ago, were like around 500-ish or so. And by the way, I definitely know what folks are talking about when they mention the elitists out there who won't even look at you if your sound equipment doesn't cost at least quad digits. So, I'm not one of those. But the key here is, this has an upgrade path. I can replace the sats when those cook, I can replace the sub, I can replace the wiring, I can replace the receiver, could solder any of this if I wanted to, could mod any of this if I wanted to. I basically did with the audio what a lot of people do when they build their own computers. So it's funny too. This isn't the only time I'll have a discussion like this that gets this spirited and this amped up. It's funny how sometimes you talk to people who are like insist on building their own PCs. However, if you talk about something like this, it's suddenly taboo to go from an off-the-shelf solution to something that you can service yourself and replace parts on yourself. By the way, even in the case of those Logitech computer speakers, the big difference there is a lack of inputs compared to something with a receiver. Because I have the consoles and everything, the extra inputs come in handy. It is technically possible, though, except for the subwoofer, to play subs in, subs out with something like Logitech as long as the impedance matches. So the Z5500s, I actually used the Klipsch satellites back when I was using the Z5500s. I only did like an upgrade to the subwoofer because I couldn't stand the satellites. It's all about replaceable parts, people. Replaceable parts, replaceable parts, replaceable parts, and, most importantly, an upgrade path. And that's just like with computers, except it's with audio-visual stuff instead. I don't know what it is with this divide between mainstream technology with computers and the AV side of it that likes to make things flashy and presentable. But it looks like I still have some more loose ends to tie up when it comes to the whole computer speaker thing. So let's bring the house lights back up and let's go back to the project area. Before we do, though, a quick pit stop in the kitchen. One thing worth noting, there's a set of Logitechs, $40, relatively recent. These are the $40 ones you can find in your Walmart and Target type stores. I picked these up as some kind of kitchen speaker setup because I was trying to get a subwoofer that wasn't so overbearing like the ones that I was using beforehand. These didn't work well at all. But these are the only ones that'll actually fit up there. So yeah, horrible little pathetic excuse for a subwoofer, but it's the only thing that'll fit up there if I want to, say, plug in a laptop down on the cabinets, or down on the countertop, and have some sound in the kitchen. This place being smaller, though, I can just crank up the living room system instead of using these. One thing worth noting, though, is that I believe I've seen Logitech 2-speaker pairs of these satellites minus the sub. So you could buy just a set of those sats, except one has a volume knob independently from what I've seen. And that's something I see with computer speakers too, is they start with just the 2 crappy ones you plug into your computer, and then they just throw in something resembling a subwoofer anyways. A lot of times you see these low-end things where the speaker in the subwoofer is not even big enough to even handle subwoofer non-directional frequencies properly. So what you end up with is basically a boombox woofer in an echoey wooden box. and that's what they call a subwoofer. Whoa, still a little zoomed there. Subwoofer. There, that's correct. Project area time. It's important to know, though, that I'm not totally an enemy of computer speakers. If I could find a use for these Logitechs, I would use them. But I actually have a set of I have my Klipsch Pro Media 4.1s that I could probably use in the project area, but they're too big to use for like bedroom speakers or something, and they won't fit in the kitchen to use for music in the kitchen. So we've got those, and those are I can't find a use for them. I'm having trouble finding uses for them. But then you have these. So it's, these are bigger, they're 5.1, they're practically a good backup system. They'll even take Toslink in, and they have a 10-inch woofer. So it's a little over, it's not overkill per se, but I can't really find any good use for these darn things. Oh, I forgot to turn on light number 5. I'm gonna blow the breaker one of these days. Got all the lights turned on, so all the daylight lights go well with these videos. Now, right next to them, though, is a much smaller variant, unfortunately with yellowed foam around the edges, because these are from the late 2000s. So, also, when you switch over from warm house lighting to daylight lights, everything that's yellowing due to old age is going to show up, and these are no exception. I believe these are Logitech X140s. Can't really... These are Logitech X140s. I actually got to rewire these things. These are Logitech X140s. I have some broken Radio Shack ones, Radio Shacks from the 90s. We'll talk about those later. I believe these are Logitech X140s. They're supposed to be two-way, but they're obviously both mid-ranges. I'm wondering if I could rewire these things and recone these things, because they were going intermittent on me. So what do I do with the X140s? Basically, I use them with my laptop setup. I use laptops as a bedroom TV. So put them on their side, they stand up sideways, and basically they take the crappy-ass speakers in the laptop and replace them with something that sounds like, a decent television. And when I say television speakers, I'm pulling way back, dipping way back, reaching way back. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry, getting old, folks. When I say television speakers, I'm referring to tube TVs, not the crappy ones you find in today's all-plastic flat panels. Think like a classic tube television, like what you'd see probably at an antique store these days, that would have a hard, thick wooden cabinet with some good acoustics, so even a television speaker wouldn't sound that horrible, even if you never upgraded the sound. That's what I try to go for with these Logitech X series. Unfortunately, the mini plug went intermittent on these and they started making fuzzy noises, but if I can rewire these, maybe put in some cones that don't turn yellow after 2 years, I could probably make these sound a heck of a lot better. Speaking of electronics tinker projects, that's where these come into play. These are, again, computer speakers, but they're Radio Shack, and it looks like they could probably take a larger driver. Yeah, they look like they could probably take a larger driver than most of the 2.0 setups that we have out there nowadays. And look, they even have little handles, because these used to have little carrying cases and stuff like that, because they have compartments for batteries. We're going way back. Now let's look at these things. These are the speakers that I had as a teenager. When the little non-amplified ones that I was plugging into my CD player had horrid sound, my folks eventually upgraded me to these, which had slightly less horrid sound. And what do we have for stuff here? Alright, so the Radio Shack AMX5s from the 1990s. 1.2 watts max. Oh, brother. Radio Shack, a division of Tandy. Yeah, remember that? They had bass and treble boosts on the back, so some primitive EQ, and you can actually turn off the amplifier if you just wanted to use them as unamplified speakers, and they took batteries. Yeah, this is basically late 90s Radio Shack fare here. Look at the yellowed foam on that garbage. Now, I cut these were floating around in my electronics waste bin, but these things are so old that the insulation was actually liquefying. The rubber is just all worn out. It's having chemical issues. So what I'm thinking of doing with these is, number one, cleaning them up. They even got paint on them, for crying out loud. What I'm thinking of doing with these is if the potentiometer hasn't gotten scratchy, I want to get the speakers out of these things and put the best speakers of that size that I can in there and rewire everything up and see what kind of sound I can get. Because they do actually take an AC adapter. They take what? They take 9 volts. They take 9 volts and 800 milliamps. So if I can get some kind of 9 volt 1 amp with negative tip, some kind of like adapter-plug setup or something like that, I could actually bring these back, fire these back up with better speakers than they had back in the 90s. Speaking of weird setups, when your speakers suck, I used to stuff these between books on my bookshelves to get better acoustics. Then I would go out from the mini plug to my half-broken portable CD player. One of the CD players that I had when I was a teenager wasn't all that great build quality, and the whole top snapped off, but the rest of it still worked. So basically what I did was I put some masking tape on the safety switch so the thing would operate with the lid off. So I would put a CD on this thing and it would spin like a record player, and then these things I'd use Radio Shack mini extension cables or whatnot to go all the way over to the bookcase and rig these up. These would be stuffed between like encyclopedias on my bookcase for better acoustics. So this was my sound system when I was in high school. My folks didn't want me to have anything too loud, so they gave me these terrible things, and I made the best of a bad situation by stuffing them in a bookcase, running a long mini extension out of these, mini plug extender thingy out of these, all the way to my half-broken CD player. They also could, do this with the little handles on the back. There we go. But I gotta take these apart, get at those speakers, put some newer ones in, and see what sound quality I can squeeze out of these, just for fun. Same thing too with repairing these things, but these, if I can get something that's full range and sounds better and whatnot despite the horrible enclosures, that would be pretty interesting to revive those things. Maybe put them back in the bookshelf. See what they'd sound like nowadays. Just have to make sure it's all hardcover books, because that's where I used to stuff these things. That's where that's where the paint and the dinged cover on them came from, because these haven't been in all that, creative conditions over the years. But it doesn't look like the plastic discolored, so this would be an interesting tinker project. See what sound quality I can squeeze out of these things with like 2 amps. Maybe solder in a better preamp while I'm at it. I don't need to have these things take batteries anymore, for crying out loud. So yeah, I'm not an elitist when it comes to sound, because I can't be. Anybody who has any brain in their heads knows that sound is incredibly subjective. There's a lot of companies out there that are ripping people off with overpriced garbage because they're selling a name or they're selling a gimmick. Computer speakers have teeter-tottered close to that. I think a Bose Wave radio probably has more gimmicks going for it than any computer speaker sets have ever had over the years. But there are definitely gimmicks when it comes to computer speakers. When you hear someone start talking about high-end computer audio, run. Because the market for so-called high-end computer audio has been destroyed. Because, again, computers aren't just using mini plugs anymore. If you're doing all kinds of fancy stuff with mini plugs, you're no better than the tinkerers in my electronics shop back in high school who took their portable CD player and they would run it through a truck amp to something like this size or bigger. A couple 100 watts, shake the whole shop, tick off people in the adjacent parts of the buildings, and if they had a Sony Discman that beeped every time you changed tracks, you would hear the beep through the woofer every single time they changed songs, unless they did the hold down the button combo or whatever it was to turn the beep off. Yes. Sound is highly subjective, but it makes for some fun tinkering in terms of what kind of hack job setups you can have. That thing has a 500 watt amp in it, or like 470, something like that. That thing has a couple 100 watt amp inside of it, and I did swap the sats when I was using this thing. It still works though. That's the thing. I don't want to go eBay, though. I want to keep it local. I want to help local businesses and help out the local economy. Plus, I think the proprietor of the computer shop that I'm thinking of would have a blast with these. I actually saw a GameStop bolt those satellites to the ceiling to use this as for their music in the shop, so I know a couple 100 watts, even if it's a so-called computer setup, actually can work depending on who you're doing business with. So gotta clean those up, polish those up, and get those ready, because there's no concentrated coolness left for them anymore. My home theater in a box system has completely displaced these things. Yeah, well, sad to see them go, and sad that I barely got to use them. But anyways, two tinker projects here. Let's see if we can maybe recone these things, because that's all yellowed and the wiring sucks. And then these. I think these would be good for good first project, though, because more nostalgia with these things, with how I used to jam these in a bookshelf back in the day. So, bottom line at the end of the day, if you're currently stuck with a computer speaker-based sound setup, it's not that you should throw your gear away because, computer speakers, but plan your liberation strategy. Start making plans for how you can get something that's not a totally off-the-shelf throwaway setup, that has an actual upgrade path where you can actually swap out components instead of constantly having to buy new systems. Because, I mean, I did mention the whole thing with computers earlier. There's a lot of parallels here. On the one hand, I want to build my own computers, I want to upgrade all my stuff, I want to not be bound to some gimmick or retail or blah 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 blah. But how come it's taboo when it comes to audio, especially if you do have a computer setup? But ultimately, this is all stuff that I went back and forth with people on in college when people swore their dorm room setup had amazing sound on par with pro audio stuff. Speaking of which, yeah, we're looking at the Audioholics channel on here. Make sure to go check them out if you want to see a channel devoted to all this speaker craziness. These guys work with equipment that I'm not even close to ever being able to afford, nor would I have the space for it. I think my setups in this small house are going to have to be more hack job in nature. But in terms of the big guys playing with the big stuff, Audioholics definitely worth a listen or a watch or a subscribe or whatever. Hey, it'd be cool if you. It'd be cool if you'd subscribe to me too, darn it. Okay, I'm not gonna do the call to actions things just because I want to play around with monetization later on. So yeah, I hope this finishes tying up the loose ends when it comes to the whole computer speaker thing. I mean, whatever you can get good sound out of, it's kind of funny. Make a video about it. I mean, I know V Westlife has certainly played with a lot of trying to get good sound out of like throwaway thrift store 90s whatever systems and things like that, but at the end of the day, ultimately, it's just fun to tinker with this stuff, to say the very least, and when it's all under one umbrella, because it's all a throwaway system, that's no fun. Come on, let's have some stuff you can swap out at the very least. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by, and I'm recording this on May 4th, so May the 4th be with you! Time to play some Star Wars after crunching this darn video. I will be burning the midnight oil tonight.